We are told that success is measured by bestsellers, blockbusters, and hits. But what about the infinite number of non-hits? In the infinite age of unlimited choice, these misses are now easily available to us. Obscure films, new music, specialist works. Our demand for the niche grows. Suddenly, the misses are becoming as profitable as the hits. This is the theory of the long tail, and it's revolutionizing the way we live.
To introduce our keynote speaker, please greet the 2007 Technology Association of Georgia Chairman of the Board and Chairman of Check Free Corporation, Mark Johnson.
No, that wasn't.
So, first, thanks a lot for coming and attending today. It's been a tremendous program, and certainly enjoyed all the speakers. But it's my delight to actually get to introduce our keynote speaker of the day. At first, a couple of things. I do want to thank the committees. Thanks all the sponsors for the funding for the program to put on a first-class program. Also, the TAG board members and Alan Mosley actually last year, who was the chairman. We were pretty excited about the progress that's taken place with TAG. We're excited about what takes place in the upcoming year. I'd encourage all of you, since you have a chance to attend, that if you try to be active in TAG or at least utilize the resources, number of programs, a number of different events that TAG actually supports, a number of the different educational processes, and take full advantage of the organization. I'm looking forward to working with Tino and his staff this year. He's got a great staff, and they're making a lot of progress, and so we're looking forward to having a fun year and a year that's continue to move TAG forward. Shifting gears, let me talk today about why we're here, and it's the topic of innovation and its impact on business today. I'm reminded of the quote from David Duffield, who's the co-founder and former CEO of PeopleSoft, who noted that the challenge in business isn't keeping your eye on your big competitor, it's to pay attention to those that are innovating. This afternoon we'll have an opportunity to hear from an individual who's gained worldwide recognition for doing that, paying attention to the innovators. As editor-in-chief of Wired magazine, Chris Anderson has been leading the conversation on innovation with agenda-setting articles including Open Source Everywhere and Kiss Your Cubicle Goodbye. In October 2004, he coined the term the long tail. And in July of 2006, he published a book by the same name. That book has won both Amazon.com and Audible.com's 2006 Business Books of the Year and achieved distinction of being on the New York Times bestseller list. The long tail has transformed the way many organizations view the economics of business. It made people believers that the future of business is about selling less of more. The term long tail has been a staple now in business plans across the world. Since Anderson assumed leadership of Wired in 2001, he has led the magazine to 5 National Magazine Award nominations, winning the top prize for General Excellence in 2005. In the same year, he was also named Editor of the Year by the Advertising Age magazine. Anderson is a former researcher at Los Alamos and an internationalist. He has lived in London, Hong Kong, New York, and we're extremely pleased to have Chris with us today. But before we bring him on stage, what we're going to do is show a brief video.
Mr. Johnson, the video has already played.
I asked that. I wonder if that might have been the case. So we saw the video. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Chris Anderson.
Thank you. Thank you, and good afternoon.
It's a pleasure to be here. I've actually been here for a few hours watching the presentations, which were fascinating, and that alone was worth the trip. What I'd like to talk to you about today is something that may not initially seem like it's about technology or even innovation. I'd like to talk about our culture and how it's changing. Broadly, I'm going to talk about the blockbuster. I'm going to talk about hits and bestsellers and the assumptions we make when we see our culture through the lens of hits and bestsellers. And the 20th century, the century we all grew up in, was one that was dominated by hits. It's a hit-driven century. And we think of that as being the natural way of things, the top 40 list, the Hollywood box office sweepstakes, the New York Times bestseller list. And that is typically seen as a mirror through which we see ourselves. But it wasn't always this way. It was before the 20th century, we were a highly fragmented culture. We were fragmented not by our interests, but we're fragmented by geography. So one town would do one thing and another town would do another, and culture moved no faster than the pace of people themselves, traveling troubadour groups, say. And then something changed. What changed was the technologies of distributing culture. First, high-speed printing created the notion of the national newspaper. Photographic technologies allowed images to be propagated. Recording technologies turned music from performance into a product. And then most powerfully in the 1930s, radio emerged, broadcast technologies. And broadcast, the economics and the physics of broadcast powerfully advantage the one-to-many. You take a small number of cultural products and you distribute it to everyone simultaneously. And a consequence of radio in the 30s and then television in the 50s was that we snapped our culture into lockstep. We suddenly synchronized around a small number of cultural products because the distribution channels were so powerful. And that led to the latter half of the 20th century, where we were all doing the same thing at the same time, first synchronized by cities and towns, and then countries, and then as a globe, synchronized by the incredible power of broadcast. That was the world that we've known for most of the last 100 years. And I'd like to suggest to you that that world is about to end. Could we switch the slides, please? Indeed, I can actually tell you the exact day on which the hit-driven century ended. It was this one. I show you this slide not just because Justin Timberlake is in town today, but because his boy band's second album, No Strings Attached, will go down in history as the high water mark of the hit-driven culture. When this album was released on the first day of spring of the new century, 5 days after the NASDAQ crash, it set a record as the all-time best-selling album. 1 million copies in the first day and 2.41 million copies in the first week. Now, this would not have cemented its place in history because every previous year some album had set a record as the all-time bestseller. What is going to cement its place in history is that it is the last all-time bestseller. This is what has happened to music ever since. What's interesting is that the music industry since 2000 has, as you know, sort of struggled, but from a revenue perspective, it's been largely flat, which is to say that the album sales have gone down, but that other music revenues, digital singles, concerts, etc., have gone up and largely made up the difference. What has plummeted, however, is the number of the hit albums. This is a chart that shows the number of hit albums, gold, platinum, and so on, which has fallen by more than 60% since No Strings Attached came out. What has happened over that period is not that music has gotten worse or that there's less of it. Indeed, there is more music being produced than ever before. There are now 70,000 albums released every year. And there's more music being consumed than ever before, thanks to the ability of the iPod to take music into the entire day. However, it's less concentrated around a small number of hits. We're basically seeing the collapse of the sort of top 40 culture in the music industry. And what I'd like to suggest to you is that this is just the beginning of something we're seeing across the board. This here is what's happening with television. As the orange line here represents the average number of channels in an American home. And as you went from the terrestrial broadcast era of 3 or 4, 5 channels to cable, analog cable with maybe 40 channels, to digital cable with 100 channels, to high-capacity digital cable with maybe 400 channels, the average share of the top 10 show has progressively fallen. Again, more television being made than ever before. There's more television being watched than ever before. But because we have so many choices, the concentration around the top 10 is diminishing. The audience is fragmenting. We are spreading around different shows at different times. And the rise of the TiVo, the rise of video on demand, the rise of television on DVD means that we're not just fragmenting around different shows, but we now watch those shows at different times up to years after their broadcast window. The presumptions about television's ability to synchronize culture, the water cooler effect, are proving false. You can see it on the individual show basis. Look at this. In 1950, this is the peak of the water cooler era, 70% of homes were watching I Love Lucy on the same night, the same time. I believe it was 7 o'clock on a Sunday night. And this was an era when you could come into your office on a Monday morning and be pretty sure that everyone in your office had done the same thing you had the previous night. They'd watched I Love Lucy, and, I don't know, Walter Cronkite to the news. I may have my arrows slightly off. But, once again, as we have more choices, the number one show has progressively declined in market share. And that's, there will be bumps and little ups and downs, but broadly that is a secular trend that's going to continue forever. It is going to be harder and harder to aggregate big audiences around singular pieces of content. We see the same thing with newspapers, where the average daily newspaper circulation has progressively fallen. And they can try all they want to boost that with various marketing schemes, but it's never going to succeed because there are so many choices. The initial competition for newspapers was not the internet; it was local TV news, which had the advantage of being instantaneous. But now, of course, there's an infinite number of other information sources. Once again, more information available than ever before, more information being consumed than ever before, but it's less and less concentrated around singular cultural properties like national newspapers. Going back to the slide, please. We see that the canonical blockbuster industry, Hollywood, which you think of as being the last haven of the hit, even there, it's declining. Last year, Pirates of the Caribbean 2 set a box office record, but the industry as a whole is actually still down from just 5 years ago. This is the number of movie tickets sold, and if you go even further and look at it from the long view, you see that Hollywood's box office golden age was just after World War II, and that the competition from television first, and then VCRs and DVDs and home theaters, and now YouTube and everything, etc., has meant that on a per capita basis, we're nowhere near the synchronized culture that we once had back in the day. So what I'd like to suggest is that this is part of a large pattern. This is a part of a huge change in the way we see our culture. And because my background is science and I spent most of my career at The Economist, I tend to look at the world through statistics. And if you'll forgive this over lunch, this I would suggest to you is the curve of the 20th century. It's called a bell curve. It's also known as a Gaussian. And it's all about averages and means and medians. And this is if you see the world this way, you make certain presumptions, you make decisions. And the first thing is you do this. You focus on the middle. So if that's the diversity in the marketplace, what you want to do is you want to go where the action is, where most people are, and that's in the middle. So you say, okay, we'll have one product down the middle, and then we'll have one product on either side, and that'll get most of the market. Safe bet. And if you really want to go out there and offer real variety, maybe you can go a little further, offer a few more products along the side, and that is the way that is the way that we in the blockbuster industry, and by the way, I should say that my day job, I'm a Condé Nast editor, my sister publications are Vogue, Vanity Fair, New Yorker, etc. We are in the blockbuster industry. This is the world. We spin out blockbuster one-size-fits-all products to audiences of tens of millions. And this is largely what we have to do because we have this extraordinary reach, we have to focus on where most people are. And so we look at the world through the bell curve lens. What I'd like to suggest to you is that there's a new curve, and it looks like this. This is called a power law. It's also called a Pareto, named after an Italian economist named Vilfredo Pareto, who in the 19th century observed that in the Italian economy that 80% of the wealth was in the hands of 20% of the population. You now know this, of course, is the 80-20 rule that says that 20% of products are going to have 80% of the sales. That observation was one that suggested there was radical inequality out there, that a few have high impact and a large number of people have low impact. And it turns out that is not just unique to Italian economics or economics in general. It is a universal of human affairs, which is to say that inequality rules. We have a small number. In this case, I've ranked products by their popularity or sales. And what you have on the left-hand side is a small number of hits and bestsellers that sell a lot, and then a large number of what we used to call misses, products that don't sell a lot. Now, as I say, this has been true forever. So why has that not why has that not been the shape of the 20th century as well? The answer is that we have a distorting effect in traditional markets, and that is the cost of distribution. We have limited shelf space, we have limited channels, we have limited screens, we have limited stations. In each case, if the cost of distribution is high, you need to be discriminating about what you let through that channel. To give you an example, Walmart had the cost of the rent on an inch of shelf space in Walmart is such that a product has to sell 2.5 times a week. It has to turn 2.5 times a week to justify that cost. The vast majority of products don't pass that test, and so the vast majority of products are not available on a Walmart shelf. The line I've drawn here is basically the cutoff point. This is where products don't sell well enough to pass the economic test of traditional distribution. They don't sell well enough to get on the shelves of Walmart. They're not popular enough to get on a broadcast channel. They're not going to aggregate audiences large enough to get into a theater screen. And that is why we've just seen half the picture. We've just seen the world through the lens of the hits because this economic test screened out everything else. Over the last 10 years, however, we've seen the rise of a brand new kind of market, a market that has infinite shelf space. And you know this as Amazon or eBay or iTunes, or in a sense the internet as a whole, as a marketplace with infinite shelf space. And for the first time in history, we can see the whole curve. And we don't have to assume that the demand for niche products is zero. We can measure the demand for niche products. And what we find out is that it turns out to be much, much larger than we thought. Next slide, please. This, just to contrast, is the difference. There's the power law or Pareto curve, and there's the old bell curve. The hits, which we usually thought of as being in the middle, you actually see as being at the head, and the niches, which we thought of as being on the fringes of the bell curve, actually turn out to be a very, very, very long tail. And the size of the tail is something we've been able to measure for the last 5 or 10 years. This is the music example. Walmart is America's leading CD retailer. A typical Walmart will have about 4,200 albums. To give you a sense of proportion, as I mentioned, every year there's 70,000 albums released in America. 700 of those albums make it to Walmart. The tiniest fraction of available variety is available in the largest retailer in the land. Now, if you convert those sales into tracks, you get the following. So there's 4,200 albums, about 55,000 tracks. Now let's contrast that with what's available in these new long-tail markets with infinite shelf space. I happen to be using Rhapsody here, but iTunes would do just as well. There's about 3 million tracks on Rhapsody. 55,000 tracks in Walmart, 3 million tracks on Rhapsody. Let's now measure the area under the long tail. And it looks like this. Look at the top left-hand side. There's the difference in variety. The red line is the variety available in the largest bricks and mortar retailer in the land, and the yellow bar is the variety available online. And when you look at the aggregate sales, that's the pie chart beneath it, what you find is that although 60% of the sales online are of music also available in Walmart, 40% of the sales are music not available in Walmart. In 3 years, this happens to be the fastest growing part of the market, and in 3 years' time, that'll be 50% of the market. And what that tells you is that half the sales online are going to be products not available in the largest retailer in the land. The size of the tail is about the same size as the size of the head. This means that we were missing half the market out there. There was a latent demand for diversity, for variety, for niche products of minority taste, as economists call them, that we had assumed was close to zero. It was negligible, insignificant. We just didn't bother with it. And it turns out to be as big as the market we already had. This is what's really different about the new culture that we're inheriting, where distribution scarcity doesn't determine what we see and what we like. We see the same thing in other markets. In Netflix, now almost a quarter of Netflix's sales are of rentals, are of DVDs not available in Blockbuster. And even in the bookstores, where Barnes & Noble and Borders are superstores who have much more choice than the independents they replaced, even there, could you keep the slides up, please? I'm going to keep referring to these slides. Even there, what you find is that although 100,000 books may sound like a lot, there are 3.7 million books in print. And about a quarter of Amazon sales are books not available in the largest retailers in the land. So let me give you some examples outside of media and entertainment. This is not actually available at your table, but this is the product line of Anheuser-Busch in 1997. You will recognize these brands. And this is the product line of Anheuser-Busch in 2007. You will recognize some of these brands. One of the kind of coolest things that happened after my book was released was that Anheuser-Busch created a division called Longtail Libations. What is the Longtail beer? It's micro beers. It's niche beers. It's craft beer. It's local beer. And what I'd like to introduce you to is their latest beer. This is a gluten-free beer. It's a non-allergenic beer made from sorghum rather than wheat or barley. Who knew that there was demand out there for non-allergenic, gluten-free beer? There is. Of course, now that you say it, of course, when we see it, of course there is. And there is a demand for organic beer, and you can go on. There are specialty beers for women. There are specialty beers for connoisseurs of strange national brews. And what's happening is not that there's been a radical change in the distribution model. What's happening with Anheuser-Busch is that they now recognize that the diversity of taste is much greater than we'd assumed in the past. And because they control their own distribution, uniquely so, they're able to experiment and tap that long-tail demand for beers that were previously thought to be uneconomic. Let me give you one other example. Shoes. So you probably don't think a lot about shoe variety unless you've seen Kinky Boots, actually, which is a fun movie. But it turns out that there is a shoe store. The Amazon of shoes is called Zappos. And Zappos has shoes by various categories. And one of the categories is vegetarian. You may not have been aware that there was a category of vegetarian shoes. But what vegetarian shoes are shoes without animal products, no leather or other animal products. And for the people who are buying organic foods, this also overlaps to some degree with the people who want no animal products in their shoes. And the best seller in the vegetarian shoes category is Converse. Converse sneakers made with canvas, rubber, etc., no animal products. Now, what you probably don't know is that Converse is owned by Nike. Nike is a non-vegetarian shoe brand, as they say. What's interesting, though, is that Nike, for the audience that is going for vegetarian shoes, Nike has, I think quite unfairly, but Nike has a bad reputation for sweatshop factory and labor conditions. I hasten to say I think it is unfair, and it is certainly old. It reflects a previous era rather than the current one, but nevertheless, that's the perception that the brand carries. Whereas Converse is vegetarian, and so in a sense, it looks like this: good versus bad. It's the same company. It's the same company, just their mainstream products versus their niche products. And you saw this with Anheuser-Busch. You've got Bud Light and you've got Redbridge. And you're starting to see this more and more, that companies are experimenting. Companies realize that the highest margins and the best brand credibility, authority, is coming out there in the world of minority taste. The niche products that may not appeal to everybody, but really appeal to the people they appeal to. What I'd like to do at this point is kind of segue from that, that concept of the long tail to my next book. which is going to build off that, and it's going to be broadly on the economics of abundance. So what do I mean by that? This is what the future looked like in 1954. This is the signing ceremony of a nuclear power plant, and the chairman of the Nuclear Energy Regulatory Commission, Atomic Energy Commission, said at the time, "It's not too much to expect that our children will enjoy electrical energy in their homes too cheap to meter." And we now laugh at this. Ha! Too cheap to meter. Look what happened. Nuclear power turned out to be dangerous. The safety considerations required such investment that nuclear power became actually hugely subsidized. It was more expensive than its alternatives. But what if he'd been right? What if electricity had been too cheap to meter? When you think about it, electricity touches everything. Imagine what an electron economy would be like if you didn't have to worry about the cost of electricity, if everything were driven by electric power. The heat was all electric. We were desalinating water and salt water and irrigating entire swaths of coastal America. Imagine how different that would be. Well, we now have at least 3 technologies that are, in fact, too cheap to meter: processing, storage, and bandwidth. And they touch every bit as much of our economy as electricity does. So it's interesting to think about what that might do to our next century. Fortunately, we have someone who's thought about this already. His name's Carver Mead. He is a Caltech professor who did some pioneering work in very large-scale integration, semiconductor design, basically. And he preached the gospel of waste. He kept saying, he understood Moore's Law. He understood that Moore's Law meant that, computer power was going to double every 18 months for the same price. And he understood what that meant on the sort of unit basis. And the unit of computing is the transistor. And what he recognizes is that Moore's Law means that transistors are going to become free, essentially free, so close to free that you could waste them. And he kept saying, waste transistors, waste transistors. And his students sat there in, the 1970s, and they had no idea what he was talking about, except for one guy. And this one guy was named Alan Kay, and he heard this, and he understood. What would you do if you waste transistors? Well, think about the dominant computing paradigm of the time. This was the era of the glass box, the mainframe era, where computing was extremely expensive. The IBM 360 was mentioned earlier. The IBM 360 was extremely expensive, so expensive that it was controlled by this priesthood called the IT guys. And the IT guys sat in the glass box, and they decided what ran on this machine and what didn't. And you could submit a proposal. As the proposal was deemed meretricious, they would allow it to run on the machine, assuming that it was very efficient in its consumption of those transistors. And the way you convinced them this was worth running was if it didn't waste its processing on silly stuff. You just ran your algorithm, printed your output, and got out. So this was the era of the command line. Enter data here. The computer will do its expensive thing, and then data will come out. And Alan Kay realized that in an era that reflected an era of scarce transistors. This is an era where transistors were very expensive, and you had to conserve them. And what Alan Kay realized is that once you start wasting transistors, you might start right here. And he thought, what if I wasted transistors by painting pictures on the screen, silly icons and cartoons? What if I animated them? What if I made the computer easy to use? And what if I filled the screen with eye candy that made it accessible to people who weren't the IT guy? And what we have is the graphical user interface in the Macintosh and today's Windows. And in the course of wasting transistors on eye candy, he completely changed the model of who computing was for and what they would do for it. It is very notable that in the era of scarcity, the only application anyone could imagine for computing in the home was organizing recipes. Once you actually gave computers to people, they found an infinite number of things to do with those computers, but interestingly, organizing recipes was not one of them. We changed the world by putting computers in the hands of everybody, and we made it safe for everybody by wasting transistors on making computers easy to use. That's what happens when you embrace waste. On my You may remember that the webmail business was a relatively mature market, Yahoo Mail, Hotmail, and others, until Google entered the business about 2 years ago. And what Google did that the others didn't is that the old model was that you had a sort of 10 megabyte limit. And if you wanted more, you'd pay for it. And Google looked at the underlying abundance of storage, recognizing that storage is growing in capacity even faster than Moore's Law. And they said, well, why not offer them all the storage they want for free? And if you go to Gmail, you'll see that that number right there is actually incrementing as you watch. Every minute, they give you more capacity. And for the average user, they're promising you will never have to delete an email. They will give you more capacity faster than you can use it. And this transformed the webmail business, and allowed them to take a mature market and gain share, so they became one of the dominant players. And I think about this every morning when I log into my voicemail system, a brand new Cisco voice over IP voicemail system, and it tells me that my mailbox is full. How does that happen? How can my tiny little voicemail messages be consuming enough storage to bother me with this message? And the answer is that somebody, I won't blame Cisco, I'll blame my own IT guy, somebody's stuck in scarcity thinking. Somebody is sort of saying, well, storage is expensive and I must conserve it. And they're not realizing that storage is not expensive anymore. And then let's waste bandwidth. We were talking about the canonical concept of what television is. Television is an expensive distribution channel controlled by powerful corporate entities who create content designed for mass viewership. That's the networks. And about 2 years ago, some kids, and it's always kids, looked at the underlying distribution mechanism and they said, you know what? The cost of bandwidth is now falling so closely that on the sort of a per kilobyte level, it's becoming free. What if we stopped treating it like a scarce resource and started wasting it? What if we said anybody can upload a video and anybody can watch that video for free and we won't discriminate? We're not going to try to guess at what people want. We're not going to try to focus just on the hits. We're going to let anybody do anything. And this, of course, resulted in YouTube, which was sold to Google for $1.65 billion last year and now has an audience about the size of a major network. And to give you just one further example of how far this goes, you can today buy a machine called a 3D printer for a couple $1,000, about the price of a laser printer about 15 to 20 years ago. And what a 3D printer does is it takes a CAD-CAM file, basically an image of an object on your screen, and converts it from bits to atoms. It has a bath of resin or powder, and it traces with a laser that object on that powder, hardening it into plastic. And out of this bath, miraculously, comes the product from your screen. In the same way that a regular printer takes pixels on the screen and puts them onto paper, a 3D printer takes lines on the screen and turns them into physical objects. Now, this is cool, but what's really transformative about it? Well, what's transformative is that complexity costs you nothing. It costs no more to make 3,000 tiny, intricate gears as it does to create one. Now, in the real world, in the world of manufacturing, 3 gears cost 3 times as much as 1 gear to make. In the world of 3D printing, 3 gears cost the same as 1 gear. This means that you can now make things as complicated or detailed as you want at no cost. And you can just imagine the sort of excessively beautiful and detailed and complicated things that we will now do because it costs us nothing to do so. And a generation is going to grow up with these printers, and they're going to invent things that we can never conceive because they will have grown up assuming abundance, whereas we grew up assuming scarcity. So let me just sort of give you some examples of scarcity thinking versus abundance thinking. Scarcity thinking is the world of shelves that I talked about before. You have to discriminate about what gets on the shelf. You need to focus on the hits and the best sellers. You can't offer everything. Abundance thinking is offering everything. The example I've given here is KitchenAid mixers. You probably think of KitchenAid as being a high quality and extremely heavy as well as expensive mixer, and it is that. It is also, you might not know this, the long-tailed color. KitchenAid makes more than 50 different kinds of colors. Now, in the average store, you only see maybe 3. And it turns out that in the old model of selling mixers, at the beginning of each season, the retailers would compete to see who would to get an exclusive color. So everyone would get white, black, and chrome, and then Target would get exclusive on red, and Walmart would get exclusive on blue, and so on. And every year they guessed, and then it became possible, first on Amazon and then on other sites, to pick your color from a drop-down menu where everything was available. And every year they've done it since then, they discovered that one of the top 10 colors was a color that nobody had bid on. Last year it was tangerine. Nobody thought the tangerine was going to be a hot color. No one knows why tangerine was a hot color. But because they could offer everybody the choice of every color, they were able to not guess but measure. And it turned out they'd been wrong. The tangerine was more popular than they expected. And this is what you can do when you don't have to discriminate. You don't have to guess. You don't have to limit choice. You can instead measure it. We see the same thing in Blockbuster, a model built around scarcity, where you have a physical product. If you want to rent 100 videos, you need to stock 100 videos. And it's all about the blockbusters. That's the name. So you stack this month's release, or this week's releases, 100 high on the back shelf. That's the normal model. And what that means is because the blockbusters take up so much of the shelf space, you can't offer much else. The average blockbuster has about 4,000 DVDs. And then came Netflix, and Netflix has a different model, a model where they have infinite shelf space. And Netflix has more than 70,000 DVDs. And Netflix found out that some of the most popular categories were documentaries, foreign films, and categories like these here. This is gay and lesbian films. These are just sort of dramas, comedies, whatever, with gay and lesbian themes. An underserved market in traditional blockbusters, but turns out to be one of the biggest markets on Netflix. There was demand out there that wasn't being measured. It was a latent demand for diversity. And you find this across the board in many other subgenres. Netflix is able to tap that, to go down the long tail of films in a way that Blockbuster can't, which is why, if you look at the share prices, they are going the ways they are. Finally, we have the tragic story of Tower Records, which went into liquidation about 2 months ago, the sort of the final nail in the coffin of the Blockbuster model for music. And what killed it was not Napster. What killed it was the iPod. The iPod is not a product that anybody asked for. No one said, I'd love to have my whole music collection in my pocket. No one asked for that. No one knew they wanted that. But the underlying trends of storage technology allowed it. And some smart engineers said, Steve, they probably said, maybe they called him Mr. Jobs. The disk drive manufacturers are coming out, because the technology allows them to do this, the learning curves are allowing them to do this, they're coming out with this tiny drive that has 60 gigabytes of storage. It's available. What might we do with that? And because that company, because Apple and other companies like it, understands that you have to listen to the technology, you have to follow the technology trends, and they listened to that number and they said, well, 60 gigs means 10,000 songs. We could put like everything. You wouldn't have to choose. And of course, and then they offered a product that allowed you to put your whole music collection in your pocket. And now, of course, it's a complete head-slapping no-brainer. Of course you want your whole music collection in your pocket. Why would you want to guess what you're going to listen to, what you're going to want to listen to this afternoon or tomorrow afternoon or later in the week? Why should you have to guess? You don't have to guess. If it's all there available to you, you'll figure it out when you get there. And what the iPod offers, along with convenience, is abundance. It offers infinite choice. And that's something that the traditional retail stores could never do. Everybody loves Raymond. I would suggest that nobody loves Raymond. And I don't mean this as a slap on Raymond. I would suggest that everyone likes Raymond. This show, and shows like it, reflect the necessary calculus of the Blockbuster model, which is to say you need to focus on the commonalities in taste. You need to focus on where our tastes intersect. And our tastes intersect at a pretty lowbrow point. Sort of light sitcoms, light comedy with relatively inoffensive themes. And that's why television's been dominated by light comedy with relatively inoffensive themes, because that's the only way you could aggregate a large enough audience to satisfy the economic demands of a broadcast channel. And you get shows like that. What I would suggest is that this is what happens when you think about when you don't have to settle, you don't have to pass the economic test. This is Lonely Girl 15. She is last year's YouTube star. No network would have greenlighted this. No affiliate would have broadcast it. No one would have funded it. No one would have advertised against it. And yet, at her peak, she was generating views of 2 to 3 million people a week. She was getting sort of network-sized viewership for her webcam show about what was putatively a 15-year-old homeschooled girl in Utah who missed her boyfriend. It actually turned out to be a ambitious job-seeking effort by 2 filmmakers. But it didn't matter. What mattered is that it was a kind of show that network television thought would have no demand. It totally epitomized what network television believed that nobody wanted, which was amateur, poor quality, poor script, poor lighting, poor acting television. And it was the opposite of regular television, and it turned out to be popular. And there are thousands like that. And today, television recognizes that they have to compete with the long-tail video, and the long-tail video does not share the production qualities, but does resonate with the audience in a way that traditional television doesn't. Now, not everybody likes Lonely Girl 15. Not everybody likes everything on YouTube, but all of us like something on YouTube. And the recognition that we're all different and that only an abundant marketplace like YouTube can address that is what's going to shake up the television business as we speak. So just to map it back to the long tail, there you have it. The short head, the 20th century markets are the worlds of scarcity, and the long tail is the worlds of abundance. And the demand is shifting down the tail as we are able to kind of celebrate our differences rather than settle for our commonalities, and we find out that all of us have, in some part of our life, we go niche. So let me just convert this into some business lessons. Broadly, in economic terms, every abundance creates its own scarcity. So, think about it in agriculture. In agriculture, food, the growth of a plant is determined not by carbon dioxide, which is abundant, but by nitrogen in the soil. And then we created synthetic fertilizers, which made nitrogen abundant, and then there became some new scarcity. It became maybe pesticides or something like that. So we've now made the underlying access to the market abundant. Anybody can get to market. So what are the new scarcities? Well, first is attention. Clearly, when everything's out there, the one gating factor is your limited amount of attention. And the second is reputation. When you look at it, when you do a Google search, what comes up on the first page is the things with the highest reputation as measured by PageRank. Now, there's a finite pool of reputation out there. Now, that pool may be growing over time, but it's never going to be infinite. And so what's really interesting is to look at the attention economy and the reputation economy as a real economy and recognize that in the world of abundance that these become the new scarcities. Not access to market, not distribution, but attention and reputation. And that's the playing field on which we're all now competing. So if you look at it as an economic model, in an attention economy, the currency of attention is traffic on the web, and the way you convert that into cash is with ads. And in the reputation economy, the currency of the reputation economy is things like links and PageRank on the web, and you convert that into money by turning your high position on Google search into traffic, and then turning that traffic into ads. So it's a pretty neat model, and in 2.5 years' time, when my book comes out, perhaps you'll see me flesh it out into a proper economic model. But that's broadly the way Silicon Valley is thinking right now. They have internalized, in the same way that Alan Kay internalized the lessons of Carver Mead. The Google generation has internalized these lessons of the attention and reputation economy. The vast majority of services out there are in fact free because the marginal cost of delivering those services is so low that there's no point in charging for them. So, how did that map to, for example, me? This is the magazine I edit. The magazine is not so different than magazines have been for many years, and it is a classic scarcity model. I have limited pages, and those pages are expensive, and so I have to be hugely discriminating. So every month, we guess at what people want, and we select the things that we think are the best, and we polish them and sand them to a high sheen and create a Fabergé egg of a magazine. And every month, were wrong in some way or another. Some articles are more popular than we thought, and some articles are less popular than we thought, and some are outdated, and some are not, and that is the consequence. But that we thought that was, that's what we had to do in our model. Now we're not competing not with magazines, but 55 million blogs, or 2.5 billion blog results I see here on Google. And rather than Fabergé eggs, this is scrambled eggs. This is a world where it's messy as hell, but that's where all the minority taste is. All the diversity in our culture is expressed out there in the blogosphere, where the common culture, the general themes, are expressed in my world of scarcity. So we used to try to do a better job at general interest, and we did a fine job. We're excellent at that. But now general interest is not the main interest. Now the interest is all specific interest. And yet that doesn't map to a scarcity model where pages are expensive and you have to guess ahead of time at what people want. So what that means is that this is the scarcity model. I have a table of contents where I organize stories according to what I think are going to be important and in rank order. And this is the world where we don't guess. This is where we measure. This is Dig, where all the stories anywhere on the web get submitted and then voted up or down. This is what I think people are going to want, and this is what people really do want. I can't, now, in my magazine, I can't do anything about this. I can't help but get things wrong. In the Hollywood world, where you spend a lot of money on producing a film and distributing it, you have to guess. In the, in the television world, where you sort of commission content and then reserve the broadcasting schedule, you have to guess. On the web, we don't have to guess. We measure. We measure. We throw it all out there and let the marketplace sort it out. And we amplify the stuff that people resonate with, and we suppress the stuff that they don't, and it's a radically different model. So in my world, I say no to everything, almost everything. I say no to most of the stories. I say no to, no to all the range of things that come to me because I have to. I have, it's a zero-sum game. I've got a limited number of pages. Most things don't pass that test. Whereas online, we say yes to everything. You want to write a blog on Lego robotics? Go for it. A blog on Lego robotics software? Absolutely. A blog on Lego robotics software APIs and hacking them? Sure, go for it. And this is, because there's room for everything. And we'll find out what works. We'll find out what people like. What we find out is all the really interesting stuff is out there in the tail. The untapped demand, the latent markets are the ones that we hadn't guessed. They're the surprises that bubble up from below. And by letting everything get out there, we're able to measure that rather than kill it off ahead of time because we have to. So I'm going to call this, with slight apologies to my friends Levitt and Dubner, I'm going to call this Freakonomics. And I'll end with just the last lessons of Freakonomics. So in the traditional model of scarcity, we need to have a business case for everything. And so we have an ROI memo, and we explain why this is going to make money. In the abundance model, we don't. We just toss it all out there. It costs so little to do so that we'll figure out the business after the fact. I know that sounds very kind of bubble era extravagant, but the difference between the bubble era and now is that it was not costless to create new businesses. I mean, the rooftop parties alone were very expensive. The Sun servers, the software, et cetera. It was very expensive to start new companies, and there was a real cost to profligate launching of things without business models. Now, we've started sort of, Dig-like businesses on credit cards over a weekend. It is so cheap in the Web 2.0 era of hosted software where all the underlying resources are basically out there and available for close to free. It's so cheap to launch new things that our policy is fail fast. We just toss it all out there. We don't guess it. We don't sit in our boardrooms, and what we do sometimes, but we try to talk ourselves out of doing this, sitting in our boardrooms, whiteboarding out what we think people are going to like. We experiment. We do rapid experimentation using low-cost models to find out what people want, and we stop guessing. In my world, to go with no, there's an underlying rule, which is that nothing gets out unless I say it gets out. Everything is forbidden unless it's permitted. And of course, in the abundance world, it's completely flipped on its head. The consequence of yes is there are no rules. Do what you want unless it explicitly seems to violate some standard we hold dear. This is very liberating to my employees. This is very liberating to my readers. This is very liberating to anybody in any company if the answer to their I want to do something is yes, because the cost for doing so is so low. In my model, I have to guess at what people want, and I have to predict their taste, and I have to suggest that I know what they want better than they do, and that's always wrong, but I had to do it. In the new world, we measure what they want, we privilege their taste, we take those statistical measures of popularity, and we use that to organize our front page. You know, no more are us deciding where things go on the page. Now they're going to decide. They are the ultimate arbiters of taste, and we're going to stop trying to guess for them. In our model, it's the traditional Sloan model of management is top-down, very hierarchical. And in the abundance model, it's bottoms-up. Increasingly, we let our interns tell us what to do. My interns told me to do a press conference in Second Life. I thought it was ridiculous. I did a press conference in Second Life because I always do what my interns tell me to do. Why? Well, for one reason is that they're the Google generation, and they have internalized all these things. The second thing is that it costs so little to do so. There was very little risk associated with doing what the interns suggested was a good idea. It's fantastic for the interns. It's very liberating. It's a fantastic learning experience for us to, rather than force the interns to conform to our model, we learn from them. You know, fundamentally, technology, the world doesn't change at the pace of technology. The world changes at the pace of generations, of people. People don't change very quickly, but people who grew up with a technology have internalized that. My interns speak Google as their mother tongue. They are what they call digital natives. In the same way that it was hard for people to understand Carver Mead because they didn't speak waste as a mother tongue, it's hard for us to really understand what waste means. I mean, we're all about quality, and now you're saying be messy, put out things that have mistakes and are incomplete, and the answer is yes. And the interns get this. The interns get this. It's all about rapid revving. It's all about the beta culture, where things go out messy and get improved with the help of the consumers. And this learning from the bottom is a hard lesson to learn for companies, but I think an important one. The final one is this. I mean, we're all about, probably I would suggest that most of the companies represented in this room are command and control companies. They're all about the power that comes with the authority, seniority, title, and so on. That's the way companies have to run. And that is the way the marketplaces ran as well. There's a reason why the phrase, we control the horizontal, we control the vertical came out, because they really did. The networks controlled the distribution channels of television. There's a reason why people say never pick a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel, as we did, because that was the way you reach large audiences. Now everybody controls the horizontal and the vertical, and everybody buys ink from the barrel, and now by the barrel. And now I have to respect every single reader out there, because any one of them can, and most of them do, have blogs, and any one of those blogs has a theoretical reach as broad as my own magazine. So command and control doesn't work, in part because I have no control. I can't control the distribution channel anymore. The users do. The users are. It is now a world where you win because of the quality of what you do, not because of your monopoly domination of distribution. And so that world is one that's out of control. It is a book I recommend to you, written by one of my friends, Kevin Kelly, called Out of Control. And it is basically the way nature works. It is read in tooth and claw, but it's extremely efficient in both creating diversity in the form of mutation and propagating that diversity in the form of natural selection. That is the world we're looking at right now. That is hard for us to understand, but is incredibly powerful and incredibly good at surfacing new innovation, quickly improving it, and raising it to the top. So with that, I will promo my book, which I believe is out there on a desk, available. If you can catch me, I'll sign it. And I think we have time for questions. Thank you very much.